the EscapeGoat podcast. A podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Fagiani, and several different guests. Hello, welcome to the EscapeGoat podcast, episode 33. Yes, 33, that's right. Delighted to welcome back to the show, John. How you doing, John?
Hello, I'm very well, thanks, David. All
Good.
the threes, 33.
Yeah, that's all of them, as far as I know.
What is 33 in bingo?
It probably is just something like that, isn't it? Jesus age, maybe. There you go.
There we go.
I'm sure.
Straight in.
I think there's actually a League of Gentlemen sketch where they have a bingo caller, kind of riffing off stuff. You know that it's definitely Mark Gatiss. It's one of Mark Gatiss's monologue-y ones.
Isn't that his lovely, lovely monologue? Isn't that the really touching one where he? Oh no, it's not. There's a musician, the musician one, isn't it?
There's a few. There's one.
Really,
I think the
really
one I'm
sad.
thinking of is it's a bingo caller who has a sort of love affair with a young Asian man.
There is a lovely bingo caller one, as I recall.
Well, Gatiss liked to get his monologues in, didn't he? He was going way back to is it that the cave tour guide one? If you go right back to the early League.
Oh, I can't remember that at all. That's beyond my memory if I ever saw it.
I think even when I started watching the League of Gentlemen, I was already a little bit not steeped, but like I'd watched a fair bit of Alan Bennett, so I was kind of like, oh, they're doing their Alan Bennett bit, you know. Like I get even as like a 13-year-old, I was like, I was making myself sound so northern when I talk about Alan Bennett. Like I just knew it from birth, you know, like in my
Well, of
DNA.
course.
Yeah.
But that's the thing is it triggers something when you say the words Alan Bennett. You suddenly start hearing his voice and you have to start talking a bit more northern, don't you? Oh mother, Alan, she said.
I think it's in one of his diaries. Alan Bennett's talking about what kind of political kind of flavour he would be. You know, like someone asked him whether he's like a left-wing playwright or anything like that, or a right-wing playwright or a centre-right playwright, and I think he said like, I've always thought of myself as soft centre.
Obviously, with a nice little twee bon mot for every question that's asked of him. Is it even possible for a northern accented man to do a monologue without someone alluding to Alan Bennett? Would that even be possible?
I don't think
in this day and age.
I don't think for a northern person to do them. In fact, I think it comes across more with women.
Actually, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, a lot of those talking heads monologues are women.
Well, we touched on that a bit in the Inside Number 9 episode, didn't we? It wasn't one of our main episodes that we talked about, but we were talking a bit about their Thinking Out Loud one in Series 5. You know, where they did a bunch of monologues in that one, and they had was it Maxine Peake?
Oh yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was the one where she was talking directly to camera. Yeah, that was very Alan Bennett. Yeah.
Well, you get it. You're right though. It just takes a northern accented woman to say one line in a sort of wistful way or something, and then you're like, okay, yeah, this is the mode we're in.
Do you know what? I think that's not true. It has to be a northern accented person saying one line, but that one line has to involve biscuits or soft furnishings.
Yeah, and passive aggression.
Exactly. But you know, if a northern person started talking about, you know, actual esoteric, exciting things like, you know, bungee jumping, for example, you're not going to think that's. Oh, maybe that is bungee jumping an Alan Bennett subject?
I'd love to hear an Alan Bennett monologue about how bungee jumping was a disappointing experience.
As I flung myself off the platform,
I realised part of me didn't want to come up again. And in a sense, part of me never did. But then part of me never went down either. Or something. I don't know.
or something like that. Yeah.
Anyway, how have you been? Like, what have you been up to? Have you been keeping busy?
Describe busy. I mean, I do stuff, you know, still mercifully working, which I'm very grateful for and gainfully employed. But in terms of busy, I guess it's still get up, sit in front of laptop, lie on sofa, eat food,
Sure.
watch flashing images, go to bed, repeat. And then at weekends, I just skip the laptop stuff and I go straight to the sofa and the flashing images. But
Yeah.
but things are gradually opening up, so there have been pub visits, etc. I haven't really been to do anything more exciting than that. Quite looking forward to getting back to the cinema. Quite looking forward to going back to galleries now they're all open again. So
I'm going to cinema in a few weeks to see a re-release of the David Lynch Dune.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah,
Very
going to
nice.
be good. I've also got the book in the corner, which I've never read, and I'm planning to read at some point this year.
Planning to read. Currently being used as a doorstop, presumably.
Yeah, it's so huge. But it's just, I actually went through quite a nerdy, I'm very nerdy. I mean, I'm not out of my nerdy phase yet, but I went through quite a conventionally nerdy teenage phase where I read quite a lot of like golden and silver age sci-fi stuff, like your Arthur C. Clarke's and your Heinleins and Bradbury and stuff, and I just never got around to Dune. So I'm sure it'll be like a blast from the past,
Yeah, I'm as I am with most literature, but I'm always put off with sci-fi that is that big, where I just think I'm not going to get through it. I'm not going to get through it. I've managed. What was it the Dark Tower, the massive Stephen King series? I remember managing one of those, and being very, very proud of myself. But then,
there's like 19 of them or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I was quite interested in those, and I remain kind of intrigued. But then someone couldn't even explain what the first one was about to me, like a sort of rough synopsis, and I was like, I think I'm going to struggle with this.
It's about a tower,
Sure.
and that tower's dark, and there you go. Yeah. What more do you need to know?
I can touch best with that.
I seem to remember that it was that a bit Game of Thronesy, the Dark Tower, or am I misremembering that?
What you mean in terms of what its subject matter and stuff?
Well, in terms of its style, in terms of what it was, in terms of its kind of fantasy-ness.
I think it is from what I've read about it. It sounds like a sort of quite trippy mesh of kind of fantasy and sci-fi stuff and cowboy stuff. Right? There's like a sort of like wandering cowboy or something.
I don't remember the Cowboys. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
I don't remember the Cowboys. I rarely remember the Cowboys in anything.
Yeah, I know that's always your catchphrase.
The
morning after.
Don't remember the Cowboys. Went to see a John Ford movie the other night and don't remember the Cowboys. Yeah.
I was watching Disney Plus recently, and I was watching two things on Disney Plus. Really, I was watching Bob's Burgers, which I've never seen much of, and is actually it's charming. It's entertaining. It's quite lighthearted. But I also got really belatedly into watching that show Atlanta. The Donald Glover kind of created thing. Have you ever seen any of that?
Yeah, I know. I haven't seen any of it. I vaguely know of it, mostly through Donald Glover's reputation. Presumably, it's absolutely barking mad.
It's quite. It's definitely got its moments. Like it's got that kind of thing, which I think because I know Donald Glover was on like Girls and knows Lena Dunham and stuff. It's definitely got that thing. I mean, I think you pointed out that everything from The Sopranos onwards kind of has this thing where every episode is kind of like a slightly eccentric short story in a way.
Yeah.
It's definitely got that. Like it's trying to apply that to the kind of hip hop hustle scene in Atlanta. But there's some particularly in the second series because it's one of those weird things. It started in 2016, but because of Donald Glover's scheduling conflicts and then COVID, it still only had 2 series, so it was quite unintimidating to catch up with. I'm already bang up to date. But yeah, in the second series in particular, there's like there's kind of episodes of any ensemble show where you like send the characters off on their own for like a sort of side quest, like solo adventure. There's quite a few of those, and some of them are amongst the oddest episodes of television I've ever seen. There's one in particular where it goes full on horror, like it's kind of I won't spoil it, but like it's one of the characters that you think of as a fairly minor kind of wacky character. It's kind of like in The Sopranos when Paulie would get his sort of focus episode or something like that. But it does that, but then it does something that's like as dark and strange and sort of centered in black culture and stuff as anything that like Jordan Peele's given us, for example. And it's in fact I think it sort of I think this is from the 2018 series, so I think in terms of Jordan Peele stuff, it comes sort of in between Get Out and Us, you know. And I don't know how much those guys, you know, I came dangerously close then to saying the sort of, I don't know if those guys know each other like they have to, you know, but I don't know if they've talked about their sort of aims in that, because it comes across as kind of equally engaged with kind of specifically black experience, and there's actually quite a kind of lot of I think anyone who's seen Atlanta will know what I'm talking about. There's quite a lot of like Michael Jackson mixed in there, for example, and there's kind of like, you know, the strangeness of Michael Jackson involved with it. So yeah, that's worth watching. Yeah, and I'm just eagerly awaiting the third series now, which I believe everyone else has been since 2018. So I'm on that train.
But now you've caught up. That's so you're absolutely fine. You're bang on. I remember years ago. I think it was Tom Gould, one of the Guardian cartoonists. Pretty sure it was Tom Gould actually, who did a cartoon about the box set Bunker, where basically you could go into a bunker for like 50 years and you had everything you needed, you had all of your supplies, and then you just had lots of DVD box sets, and then 50 years later you'd come out and go, right, I've caught up.
No, but it'd be like the Twilight Zone episode where, you know, you'd break the laser on the DVD player or something, and it'd be like, no, there was time now. There was time now.
I could have watched more.
Well, I was saying to someone the other day that I think I might have told you before, but I've always had the kind of Rear Window-esque fantasy, not of being nursed by Grace Kelly, but of breaking your leg and having time to do things, you know, like just sort of in repose. And the problem with working from home since the pandemic hit is that wouldn't even get you off work anymore. You know, you break your leg, and you're just like in the next day. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's weird, isn't it? It's obviously we're both aware how fortunate we are that we've stayed employed throughout it. You know, we've neither been furloughed nor unemployed, and that's absolutely the best state of affairs. That's the caveat. Let's get that out of the way. But then also, I think I'm the same as you. I'd always thought Game of Thrones, for example, I was always like, I'll get round to it. But to be honest, I'll get round to it like when I've broken a leg or something.
Yeah.
I don't really feel the need to, you know, go into it. It'll be because I've run out of options. I know people love Game of Thrones, but it's just not. It's not something that I feel I really want to do unless I had a chunk of time where I could do it very, very intensely. And the thing about the pandemic is that you've had a little bit of that because you can't go out and see people, you can't go to cinemas, you can't go out and do anything. But at the same time, you're also working from home. So it's this weird kind of halfway house between actually being able to binge watch stuff and kind of not being able to do it in that way because you're not ill, you're not off work.
Yeah.
And also in the same way, I don't know about you, I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but just with everything that's gone on, my concentration levels and engagement with things have been all over the shop. There've been months where I've just been like, I can't watch anything that I haven't seen before, and frankly, I can't watch anything more intellectually challenging than Taskmaster.
Yeah.
I can't watch anything while I'm working. I even tried a few weeks ago. I even tried having the snooker on in the background while I was working, and I couldn't even do that.
Yeah, snooker is famously distracting.
Well, it's commentary. If anyone is talking at me, I just can't. I can't split my attention. I can't split my focus. That said, did you watch the snooker?
Whatever.
I tell you what, this year. I mean, it was the right thing at the right time. It was exactly that of like, I've basically run out. I've exhausted my attention span on any kind of, fictional documentary. But it was a bank holiday weekend. I wasn't going anywhere. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. The snooker was on, and I just rekindled my childhood adoration of watching snooker. It's wonderful.
I don't know.
It's like a zen state. As you watch enough of it, and then you find yourself screaming at the top of your voice because someone's just missed a brown. It's incredible.
Do you also find yourself just occasionally going, and that's a bad miss?
Oh, that's a bad miss.
My dad used to say, I don't know if he's winding me up, but my dad used to say that he used to watch the snooker on telly in black and white in the 70s, and I was like, did you? And he's like, yeah, the commentary had to be really good. And I was like, yeah, I bet
it did. Well, there's that that famous kind of commentating gaff, isn't there, where the guy says, "So for those of you watching in black and white, he's currently aiming for the red, which is the ball next to the pink." Yeah, Jim, we have David Attenborough to thank. This is one of the things I learned during the championship.
Go on.
Was that David Attenborough was controller of BBC Two when colour television came in, and he was looking for things to show off the new glorious Technicolor, and he decided on snooker, and he created Pot Black, which was the kind of one frame snooker tournament that became hugely popular, and it was because of how colourful it was and how it would show off the new technology. So David Attenborough.
It was like the Avatar of its day. I love that the dated part of that analogy is Avatar, not the snooker.
It was the Avatar of its day. I mean, it's the Wizard of Oz of its day. There we go. That's probably closer to it, isn't it? With Technicolor coming in.
That's right. Yeah. Judy Garland walks from sepia-toned Kansas into a snooker hall,
into the Crucible in Sheffield.
Yeah. And, that's a weird fan edit.
I'd make it.
I knew David Attenborough's kind of long ago hinterland as controller of BBC Two, because I think I'm right into this. I hope this isn't an urban legend, but I think he commissioned Monty Python. He rubber stamped it, basically. I've got no idea if he'd seen any of their work.
Really? I mean, the timescales would be right. He also gave us like Civilization, didn't he? And all sorts of great stuff.
Well, Civilization, Monty Python,
They're very similar, I'd say. Kenneth Clarke and John Cleese have much the same air of entitlement and authority about them.
There's a bit in an early South Park when they're giving Jesus a pep talk so he can continue fighting Satan, and I think Stan says something inspiring to him, and Jesus goes out, he's saying it's a Bible quote, and Jesus goes out and is revved up by it, and Kyle is like, Stan, that's not from the Bible, that's from Wrath of Khan, and he's like, oh, Star Trek, the Bible, what the hell's the difference? Which I second. I second heavily. My partner's been teasing me that she's been like spotting when the first time in every day that I actually mention Star Trek is. So she'd just be like 8:10 p.m. The moment it comes across. I often do get into the evenings, but then we don't see each other a lot during the day. So.
Get into the evening without mentioning Star Trek.
It's tough.
Well, that's just without anyone else around, though, isn't it? That's different. If David mentions Star Trek and there's no one there to hear it,
it's that old Cohen. Yeah,
he's still mentioned Star Trek.
Well, as you know, my day job is I'm a lecturer in Blake's 7. So it seems a bit
it's
gauche
hard
to mention.
Yeah, it's hard to crowbar in sometimes.
My audience just don't like it. They're too tribal. Actually, Blake's 7. Funnily. Blake 7 is either on iPlayer or BritBox or something like that, and I have never seen any of Blake 7. Although I always, like growing up as a sci-fi nerd, I always used to catch like talking heads on best of TV programs talking about why it was so great and stuff. And
Stuart McConey.
Yeah, and I've just never seen any of it, so I think I should probably at least watch like the first episode, just get the gist of it.
I remember exactly two things about Blake 7. I do vaguely remember it being on in the 80s, I'm guessing. I remember the theme music, which absolutely bangs. And I remember the sets being very, very wobbly. But, everything was in the 80s. But that's a cracking theme tune.
I think I remember, actually, because we our local Laser Quest in the 90s had a mixtape of sci-fi theme tunes that you used to run around shooting each other to.
Of course it did.
So it included that. Included
everything you just said was so on brand. That was.
Yeah. In many ways, I never left that. That was my bungee jumping. I've not come up yet.
He went laser questing in the 90s, and you got shot, and you never got up again. And
yeah.
You're still listening to the theme music from Blake 7, trying to get yourself back on your feet.
I've got a cute story from it. I went to Laser Quest in Manchester with like two brothers that I knew, and the older brother, and the younger brother they were quite competitive with each other, and the older brother like sort of barged his way to the front of the queue to kind of register your name for it. Like at first, and he called himself RoboCop, like badass, 12-year-old RoboCop, and his brother was just like, damn. So he just went to the counter, he was just like RoboCop 2.
And those brothers grew up to be Oasis.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, oh damn it! You spoiled my. You spoiled the end of it. Yeah, they did. And we never heard from them again.
You've got 20 seconds to comply.
Yeah. Anyway, I should probably remind the audience and probably us too why we're actually gathered here.
Why? Why are we here? Why are we here, David? Why are we gathered?
Well, so listeners with long memories will remember that John was on an episode talking about Spaced a few months ago. But he was also, the first episode he was on was we were discussing our favourite episodes of the sort of horror drama anthology show Inside Number 9. Written by Steve Pemberton and Shearsmith, which has been going for several series, and we did an episode on that last year, which I'll link to in the show notes. And we talked about basically what was then the first 5 series of it, with the 5th series airing shortly before the COVID pandemic. And we picked out our favourite 9 episodes. Basically, brought some of our individual favourites to it, and sort of agreed on some as well, and talked through those. So that was great fun. And then, as now, we were awaiting the series 6 of it, which was. We'll talk a bit about how that's come about, because I think apart from anything else, we've got some insight on that from Shearsmith and Pemberton a bit on what this series that we're now looking at is. But what we've decided to do is we're going to have, I guess, like a fairly deep dive tonight on what's aired to date, because we're recording this near the end of May in 2021, and we're actually in the middle of series 6, so we've had 3 episodes out thus far. They're airing every Monday at the moment. And I kind of want to do it like this, so we get to have a relatively fresh take on it, and get the episode up there, and because I know like fans are going crazy for them at the moment and wanting stuff to listen to. But also we're definitely gonna reconvene, and we're gonna talk about the back half 3 and the sort of series as a whole when we've got a bit more perspective on it. Because as it stands, episode 3 of the series just aired yesterday. So me and John's take on it is necessarily fairly fresh. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just wanted to, just before that, John, I just wanted to, without going into specifics as much as possible, because I think we'll run into some problems here, but in not being specific, but what's your kind of initial reaction and feel for this series now that we've had half of it,
A bit before we do that, I just wanted to say, you realise that's 2 threes. We're starting with a 3, and then we're coming back for the next 3. That's all the 3s again, David.
I forgot you got like really into numerology during the last lockdown.
Apparently, yeah.
Noel Edmonds.
I mean, there's sod all else to do, isn't there? I might as well. Everything's chaos. You might as well look for meaning in random numbers as anything else. Yes. It's. I think what's interesting for this series is how it seems to have a lot more buzz around it. And I don't know if that's just me having, as discussed in our Inside Number 9 episode, kind of dipped in and out and then kind of gorged on the whole thing. But it does feel like there's a bit more weight behind it. Like the BBC are really kind of pushing this as something kind of more prestige, perhaps, than they were before. It's certainly more than I was aware of. For the previous series, I'm seeing a lot more press and hype for it. Them being on, the front of the Guardian guide, and it seems to have been trailed a lot. And I think that's my overall. My impression seems to be that they've got kind of to a place where the BBC are really, really behind them, and are really pushing this as something that they know a lot of people enjoy. And I do wonder how that will have affected them, if at all, whether they feel more pressure or less pressure. I think there's an element of, this is your 6th album, if you will, and actually we know all your fans are going to buy it. You've got your fan base. You've got a nice big fan base who are absolutely going to buy it. You don't really need to worry. You'll get a few new fans, but you don't necessarily now need to worry about kind of breaking into anything. So I wonder if there's an element of them. I don't know where they're going to go with that. I don't know whether it's going to be, same song, different verse, slightly, or if they're gonna be braver with it. I feel like with the first three, my kind of instant reaction to them is that, oh god, broad sweeping statements already this early. I feel like there's nothing has massively shifted at this point in terms of novelty or surprise or reinventing the wheel particularly. But then again, they sort of don't need to do that. They can just, they could just carry on doing what they do very well and writing it very well. So I think that's kind of where I am with the first three, without going into specific details about those three episodes.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? I was actually going to say, sort of even more briefly, kind of maybe coming at it from a slightly different angle, what this series what I was looking for in this series, I guess, and what I guess we'll talk at the end about whether I found it yet or not. When we did our kind of favourite episodes of the first 5 series, do you remember neither of us actually picked any, although we came close, I think, neither of us actually picked any from the 5th series. And we sort of commented on that at the time. And that's not, as I think we made clear then, that's not by any means because the 5th series is bad. But I think I mentioned that what I was starting in very nascent form to see was the show kind of like, mildly repeating itself a little bit. Like, or like settling into like, this is that kind of Inside Number 9 episode. A tad, which is, for any series that's gone, more than 3 series, that's going to happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a very a strangely interesting thought about. Do you know what? I think I talked in the first one about wanting to time where the twist came and whether it came at the same point in each episode. And actually, with this one, I started thinking, I wonder how many categories you can break it into in terms of saying, like, there's a scary one, there's going to be a horror one, there's going to be a kind of touching, unexpectedly sweet one, there's going to be a slightly more sinister one. I had another category as well, but in terms of what we've had so far, I feel like we've had the kind of slightly playful one. We've had the playful one. We've had the sinister one. And then we've had the somewhere in between.
Yeah. I think there's definitely some categories. I think when we talk about the episode specifically, we can draw some of those obvious parallels. Some occurred to me, and then I was texting someone the other day who pointed out another one that I hadn't thought of in terms of shifting them into sort of things, things we may have seen already or things that are variants on. Like, I remember talking to you about how I thought the one in Series 5, Misdirection, that was about, magic tricks and stuff, was kind of a, Riddle of the Sphinx crossword variant.
Kind of a repeat, yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of, in the sense that, you might call them the sort of showmanship episodes in a way, where there's something very clever being explained to you and there's a macabre mystery hidden in it, But as I say, we'll talk at the end, and we'll talk again after the whole series has been on about whether we found that kind of novelty in it. Because I was saying to someone was messaging me about their takes on the first 2 episodes of this series, and they were saying that they were not that impressed thus far. And I just said something, not being like totally fanboyish about it or anything, but I was just like, or defensive, but I was just kind of like, well, if there's one episode in this series that takes my breath away, that's done its job, right? That's like, and if there's 2, that's extraordinary. Like that's. That really is a high yield for something like this, isn't it? Like anthology shows being... I mean, this is a much more consistent anthology show than most anthology shows, partly because it's written by the same guys who know what they do and what their strengths are, right? I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's the thing that leads me on to think about as well is, obviously it's airing at the same time as the new Partridge. And I feel like with both of these things, they have such loyal, passionate fan bases that there is inevitably, part of the conversation is inevitably going to be, were you disappointed? It's almost like that is the foundation that you're working from, which is strange for something that so many people love, that our natural instinct seems to be, well, let's find out if it can reach the heights of something that it reached. 5 or 10 years ago. And of course it can't ever, because they're different and we're different, and familiarity breeds contempt and all of those things. So it's just about how they handle that pressure as well. I think how much they can mitigate that. Now, without we haven't started talking specifically yet, but certainly at the beginning of season 6, they're at the beginning of Wuthering Heist, they're practically yelling at us. Don't worry, we know. We're going to be self-deprecating about having run out of ideas and etc. So they're certainly aware of that. I also find myself with the new Inside Number 9 and the new Partridge, because they're such big things.
This is This Time series 2.
Oh yeah, sorry,
it's airing on the BBC at the moment.
This time. I think, it's like your favourite band releasing a new album. It's like, how can you know? How can you know until, I'm not going to know until 2 or 3 years down the line. It's like with Partridge, for example, I'm only now realising the work of absolute genius that is Mid-Morning Matters. It's it's spectacular, but at the time it was just like, it's a new Partridge thing, and it's pretty funny, but it's spectacular, it's wonderful, and hindsight is a really important thing, and living with something for long enough is a really important thing. Again, it's we're turning mainstream television into something slightly more profound and pompous, perhaps. But I think that's it. So in a way, I don't want to, I don't really want to have discussions about disappointment or not. I'll let you know when I've watched them all another 5 times, and I'll come back to you in a couple of years, and then we can do another top 9.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting because this podcast, is still in its relative infancy, but we haven't really done that many kind of fresh takes on things yet. Really, I think me and Isabel had a bit of a chat about Star Trek Picard, last year, and that was fresh to us, and we. Sorry,
was that your first mention of Star Trek today, or have you?
That was I think at least my second, yeah. But,
right, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you mentioned Wrath of Khan earlier, didn't you? Sorry, I wasn't.
Don't manage. We don't bother keeping track of the second mention. That we'd be there all
right.
night.
So you don't actually clock the number of mentions. It's
no,
just
I should actually get that.
The first mention appears.
Almost like a sort of a pedometer that's just attached to me that just kind of does the clicks every time. No, but I these fresh. I'm not that interested to talk about disappointment either. But I think it's interesting when you're doing these fresh takes how things have hit you in the last few weeks, and how they. Because I realised that you were talking about the hype around it, the sort of maybe the BBC push behind it, and I guess part of that's coming out of the lockdown and things like that. Not that we're fully out of lockdown yet, but the anticipation for our favourite series and stuff as they come back, it is quite voracious, really, isn't it? Because you do need things to look forward to and things to adore, in a sense. And like I was talking about my expectations for the series and my hopes for it, that they did feel quite serious. So I think we'll get to talk about the first episode properly in a sec. But I think my reaction to that afterwards was actually quite it's silly for a sort of comedy drama, isn't it? They were quite serious. The way I was assessing it felt quite important, and I almost had to hit myself in the face with a custard pie at one point. I was just kind of you are just meant to be you can critically appreciate this, but you are meant to be enjoying it. It's kind of I think it was maybe in my head, all these kind of lockdown treats, I guess they become such a big thing in your head,
Yeah, I mean, I think they invite that as well, don't they? I mean, with this, we're now into the 6th series of as we said in the first podcast, of a nominally comic series where some episodes just aren't funny, where some episodes are either horrific or touching or moving or profound or just pure strange. So they, I think they invite that level of engagement with it. I think they invite that. I mean, they did a Commedia dell'arte episode, for Christ's sake. They're inviting that kind of intellectual analysis to an extent, whilst also trying to provide some kind of. I mean, it's not quite mainstream entertainment, is it? Because it's. I mean. God, it's 9:30 on BBC Two on a Monday. It's we're not quite Miranda here, are we? But I think they invite that. I think they invite a sense of seriousness and loyalty and thought about it. They invite you to engage with something and go, this is not just going to be fluff. There's going to be something slightly meatier here, slightly more to get your teeth into.
I just, we'll move on to the first episode in a second, get properly talking about it, but I just wanted to say, because obviously part of the BBC push for it is the Shearsmith and Pemberton are doing these podcast sort of not instant reactions, but they're doing these like supplementary material podcasts on BBC Sounds, which I think I've listened to the 3 that they put out thus far. You've listened to the first one. I think in that first one they talk about how this Series 6 that we've got is something of a blend between the Series 6 they envisaged pre-COVID and the Series 7 that they wrote in lockdown. To the extent, because I knew that had happened, but what I didn't know until I heard them talk about on BBC Sounds was that they've kind of mixed and matched. So some of the episodes they ended up producing for Series 6 and filming and are releasing are, I think it was maybe like 4 of them were newly written. So 4 of them were ones that didn't exist when they started making Series 6, and maybe 2 of them were. And they've actually, so some of the stuff they were going to make for Series 6 has ended up in what will eventually get a Series 7. And I thought that was really interesting because we can talk a bit about these 3 as we go forward, but there's maybe some of them where you can see they were, well, let's not be coy. The third one in particular, you can see as maybe like one where it's designed to be as few people in a room together as possible.
Yeah, I haven't listened to the most recent 2, as you say, so I'm not sure which ones are which. I mean, you can it's kind of an interesting game to play at the moment. Actually, is to kind of identify what was filmed pre and what was filmed post-COVID with anything, with any TV show at the moment. You're like, I see what's happening here. It's all, this is post-COVID because no one's getting close to each other. You could, these people might not even be in the same room. There's lots of various camera angles, and that's very interesting. And I'm sure will be kind of analysed in terms of how COVID has changed film and television production, which will be a very interesting thing. In terms of the episodes and how they were written, whether they were written pre-COVID or post-COVID, in a way, I don't want to know, because I feel like they've already given us plenty of episodes where it's just them in a flat. It's they've given us Bernie Clifton's dressing room and
if one show came pre-locked down, it was Inside Number 9, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's kind of that. So in a way, it's the show that it matters for the least, because they've always made a big deal out of having a very few people in a very confined space, and that fundamentally, so far in this series hasn't changed. Maybe they're coming up with 20,000 people in a football stadium episode, but I'd be surprised.
Actually, a football stadium one, that's a pretty good enclosed location where you can get a lot of ventilation.
Well, I mean, they did the referee's dressing room. I think that's
as close as we're going to get to that. Yeah.
That's as close as we'll get to the stadium. Yeah. But obviously, I do care. Obviously, I'm a nerd, and I'm gonna go. Oh, that's interesting that they wrote this one pre-COVID and then decided to kind of retrofit it. So with Wuthering Heist, for example, that's one of them, isn't it? Where they kind of retrofitted it in order. The big thing being the kind of demonstration of the heist itself. I don't know. It's hard to know. You can't know what hasn't been made. You can't know what hasn't been written. We can speculate, and it's a fun guessing game. But I'm gonna try very hard to take them all on their own merits, rather than thinking, I can see why they put this one in, because it's 2 people in a shed.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, just before we move on to Wuthering Heist, I the last thing I'll say on that then, because you mentioned sort of, obviously we're fans and we're, doing a podcast talking about it. It's interesting, isn't it, that Wuthering Heist and Simon Says, episodes 1 and 2 of this series, I thought when I was thinking back after Simon Says, I was like, one of the strange things, I'm not sure it's off-putting, but one of the strange things about this series in front-loading those 2 episodes is they're both in slightly different ways episodes that encourage you and almost troll you to engage with the idea of Inside Number 9 and fandom and what Inside Number 9 is and what fans' expectations of it are. And I thought that was a really interesting front loading, because I think we'll talk about it, but I think with episode 3, whatever its qualities, you get something more like a straight up episode of Inside Number 9. But the first two are kind of gleefully, maybe like a bit, a bit gonzo meta in some ways,
Yeah, I think the first one is. I think Wuthering Heist is. I'm not sure about Simon's. I mean, it's got. You're right. Simon Says has the whole kind of fandom stuff going on, which is kind of writ large through their work, and it's a creator of a science fiction show. So yeah, I guess maybe that's there.
I suppose in the sense that any episode that's overtly about TV production, I mean that's just going to innately carry a level of that to it, isn't it?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, this fundamentally takes us back to the first chat that we did, where it was the episode, the categories of episodes are all making TV. What happens backstage? What happens backstage in making TV or theatre is kind of one of their great obsessions.
Because you pointed that out going as far back as Seance Time, didn't you? Whether they're doing that behind the scenes sort of scaredy cam thing.
Yeah. Well, and it goes all the way back to the Understudy as the first time they're doing it in the theatrical context. But certainly, yeah, I guess you could. I'd actually not. I'd not put that together before. But actually, Simon Says is kind of even further back removed from what happens backstage on a TV set. It's going all the way back to what happens when you have the creator and showrunner who no longer wants to do it and has kind of betrayed the fan base. I'm scare quoting, folks.
Yes.
Has betrayed the fan base. So actually, Simon Says is absolutely a backstage one. They've just gone further backstage than they ever have before, fundamentally.
No, you're right. You know what? I think we'll revisit that categorization of the episodes. Maybe before we do our next show, I'll have a think about that and see whether I can fit everyone into something. But let's go straight to Wuthering Heist then, because so this is the first episode of Series 6. Do you want to tell us if you have any experience with Commedia dell'arte, John? You knew I was going to ask this.
Well, there was that time in 16th century Italy when I was involved in a travelling troupe. Do you know what? I don't. I actually don't. Commedia dell'arte was one of those things that got thrown around when I was doing theatre studies, and then thrown around again when I was doing a drama degree as something that was very much in the past and very important. It only ever really came up when we were studying Dario Fo, who is I'd say early 20th century, maybe mid 20th century Italian playwright who wrote Accidental Death of an Anarchist and Can't Pay, Won't Pay, and wrote some farces, basically. They were Italian farces, and they were essentially, we talked a lot about how they were influenced by the Italian tradition of Commedia dell'arte, and how that had then been translated into something more modern, into a kind of mid 20th century kind of thing. And I mean, they're absolutely wonderful. Accidental Death of an Anarchist is stunning. But I don't have that much knowledge or experience of Commedia dell'arte, other than knowing that it's fundamentally it's a cornerstone, isn't it? It's a foundation of clowning. And therefore is a foundation of everything that we consider to be comedy, because comedy fundamentally hasn't really changed in a few hundred years. It's the nuance of the language, for example, in a Shakespeare comedy has changed. The language has changed dramatically, but the joke set up scenario, it's all fundamentally the same. It all comes back a little bit to that there are only 7 stories. There's probably only 7 jokes. It's much the same. So in that way, I'm by no means going to claim to be an expert at all in Commedia dell'arte, other than it gave me a little a little thrill. I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I'm friends with someone whose dad taught at Bretton Hall. So I actually taught the three guys at Bretton Hall, and I sent her a link to the podcast, and she's like, "Oh yay, Dad'll be so pleased." But also that this is something a drama teacher would have a wank to. It's very, very true.
It's a line they put in Gemma Whelan's mouth, isn't it? Who
exactly, yeah. Now, interestingly, I must say this before we go on. Weirdly, that night when that first episode aired, I'd been doing a kind of synchronized watching with my friend. I'm watching an episode of Upstart Crow, of all things, which of course has Gemma Whelan in it as well, who's wonderful. But it was the episode where Kemp convinces them that they need to do some commedia dell'arte, and he gets them all to do a Lazzi. And then shortly afterwards, I was watching Gemma Whelan in another commedia dell'arte.
That is a weird link. Does she wear a mask in that Upstart Crow?
She does not. No, because she's not involved in the commedia dell'arte. She's just still running around trying to convince Will Shakespeare to let her act. Which I'm about halfway through the first series. Presumably, at some point, she will.
Yeah, I told you what a bizarre undertaking I think Upstart Crow is on a number of levels. But I think just the idea that someone who'd done Blackadder 2 would decide that the thing to do in later life would be an Elizabethan comedy.
I agree, but as I think I said to you, I think, without again sounding too pretentious about it, I think Shakespeare is other. I think Shakespeare is his own category. So I think you can get away with that. I think if you were to do, Elizabethan, if you were to do one, focusing on Francis Drake, for example, I think, you're going to come a cropper. But if you're doing Shakespeare, it's just got a lot more. There's a lot more potential to it, I think. If nothing else, just in terms of the anachronistic jokes that you can make.
I think I suppose Blackadder 2 gets most of its Shakespeare jokes out in the one with Bob in its first episode.
Yeah, and Gemma Whelan in Upstart Crow is Bob. There's no subterfuge at all. That is Bob.
Yeah.
She has been cast as the Bob character.
Sure. I mean, actually, we're getting on a tangent here, aren't we? But
we are.
In terms of commedia dell'arte, for me, I think I've heard mention of it at school when we read Volpone, because Volpone in some ways is a much more kind of English tragic kind of thing by Ben Jonson, but it also draws on those Italian comic stereotypes, and I think there's been productions of it with kind of ornamentation and kind of making the characters less realistic and all that kind of stuff. But actually, on watching Wuthering Heist this time, the things it reminded me of on that side of things were, I've been to see the pantomime pretty much, not every single year, but kind of a lot of years with the family, mostly in Edinburgh, actually. Scottish pantomime is what we do, which is a particular flavour of pantomime. So very, English pantomime's a bit inauthentic to me,
to paraphrase Stuart Lee, Scotch pantomime, the worst kind of pantomime.
You haven't enjoyed Shakespeare until you've heard it in the original Klingon, John. But yeah, I mean, it's reminding me of that. But actually, it was in Wuthering Heist when they joke about the subplot and how it's really boring and you just need to get this bit out of the way and it won't impact on anything. The thing it reminded me of a bit was Marx Brothers movies. Where kind of like the joke about
interesting, a
lot of the even the acknowledged classic Marx Brothers movies are those bits where there's like it's sometimes Zeppo, it's not always Zeppo, but there's a straight quote unquote straight pair of lovers who take up bits of the plot where the Marx Brothers whiz around that and make bits of that plot happen, but you'll pause for a romantic song and you'll pause for a bit of subterfuge about letters exchanged and things like that, and then you'll get back to the Marx Brothers doing their thing. So even some of the more classic Marx Brothers movies like Night at the Opera have that built into it. So like I guess what I mean is like the commercial strictures of like middle-aged as Florence aren't that different from the ones of like MGM Studios in the 1930s.
Yeah, well, they're all drawn from the same tradition, aren't they? I think the gag about subplots goes further back. You go back to classical commedia dell'arte. You probably go back to the Greeks, don't you? I imagine there's I'm suddenly put myself on the spot and I'm racking my brain. Actually, there's not much of a subplot in Oedipus, is there? But like we're all aware, this is the thing. It's the thing that Number Nine or Inside Number Nine always does very well, which is credit us with being very versed in the vocabulary of how. Firstly, how television is made, but then how drama is made. It's it's a really easy gag to make, to say, oh, now here comes the subplot, because we go, oh yeah, I know what a subplot is, absolutely. But if you asked any of us to write 60-minute episode of television, then would we know quite how a subplot actually worked and the mechanics of it? Perhaps not, but we can intrinsically say, oh yeah, we know what. We know what the B story is. That's fine, and we feel flattered, and we feel part of the gang, as it were.
I remember. Sorry, I'm so playing into the stereotype of me here, but someone was saying I was listening to a podcast where they were rewatching the original Star Trek for the '60s, and they were saying that the episodes dragged a bit, and they were saying part of the reason is just kind of general aesthetics of '60s TV being different from the sort of '90s Star Trek that they were used to. But they were saying that they had a bit of a think about it, and they were realizing that part of the reason it seemed to drag for them was that in the original Star Trek, you tend to just get one plot. And in the way that just general TV narrative had evolved by the late 80s, early 90s, in Next Generation, for example, you tend to get subplots, and it helps the whole thing whiz around a bit more, because you're doing the equivalent of cutting from one thing to another throughout, and it makes the whole thing a bit zippier. And they just, and it has effects on the narrative as well. Like, the reason the later Star Treks have a much more truly ensemble cast, with like actual qualities in it. Everyone gets their own episode, and the original Star Trek basically focuses on Kirk, Spock, and McCoy is because they didn't really have subplots. The ship is facing one danger. They mostly help them get through it with a bit of help from the rest of the crew, and that's the end of the story.
Yeah, you've just reminded me. Actually, there's an episode of Buffy that is called The Zeppo, which is where Xander is the B story, but the episode focuses on him. So there's this kind of Armageddon going on. There's a battle to save the Earth going on, but you really only see it in very short cuts, and the rest of the story stays with Xander, and it's the B plot and what happens if you take the B plot and you make it the A plot. And that's a very good episode.
I think you mentioned that one. I really need to watch that. I was just thinking, we were talking about Gemma Whelan before. It's interesting because you when we were talking before about the type of comedy that Inside Number 9 is, and the sort of stuff it can get away with in its time slot and everything, you briefly mentioned Miranda. That moment when someone accuses, what's he called? Patson Joseph comes in and accuses her of Mirandering of fleabagging to the audience.
Fleabagging, and then she says, "I'm not. I'm Mirandering." Again, yeah, that's a very. I mean, it's a. I was going to say tongue-in-cheek, but it's not even that, is it? It's a fairly bold-faced wink at the audience.
Yeah.
Saying, yeah, you know what we mean by that. You're part of this gang. You're part of this club. You've got that vocabulary. You know exactly what you mean by that.
It's interesting there, though, isn't it, that they highlight, and obviously they're well-versed in TV nerdery themselves, and they know what's going on. They've probably, met both Miranda Hart and Phoebe Waller-Bridge, but like they acknowledge that there's been some potent and popular uses of the to-camera stuff in recent BBC comedy,
Yeah, there has. And again, it's Stuart Lee had a bit about this as well ages ago, about how he quite likes Phoebe Waller-Bridge and he quite likes Fleabag, but suddenly everyone was saying she's invented this new technique, which is talking direct to camera, and it's like it's not new. It's been it's been happening in TV and film for a very, very long time, and suddenly everyone seemed to jump on it and go, isn't it bold and new and fresh and original?
That's funny. I should say that I was actually at a pub the other day, and they were passing carefully through a pub hastily, and I should say legally, and they'd started to do that thing that pubs do where they project films onto the wall in the background, and the film they're projecting was Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, nice. Yeah. which I actually watched quite recently. Did I mention that? I did mention that to you. I watched quite recently, and I had a few notes about Wuthering Heist that I wanted to run by you. Some of them. Yeah, we got off track there. What's the point of mentioning Ferris Bueller? Is two camera monologues.
Yeah, no, you know what? Before I go through some of the sort of like more trivial ones, I'll talk to you more about the kind of bigger picture, I guess. I mean, obviously, in marrying the heist stuff and the Del Arte stuff, you know, they are. I think they've said in the interview that they're doing the mask thing. Basically, they were looking for an excuse to work masks into the plot and mash it up with something. The actual structure of this episode, you know, where they show the planning of the heist and then the aftermath of the heist. There's probably other precedents for that, but the one that obviously occurred to me was Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah.
Because that's almost exactly what happens in Reservoir Dogs, you know, with a bit more temporal flummery, you know. But it reminded me out of that partly because
temporal flummery. That's your band name, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah. No, it's just when I was doing GCSE drama, which is as far as my drama, you know, where my drama training started and ended. We did some scenes from Reservoir Dogs because we were teenage boys, but also because we were we even at that age we realised how well it lent itself to the theatre, because Reservoir Dogs could be done on stage. Basically, you know, it's almost all of it. So it reminded me of that. What I was wondering is, you know, we talk about Gemma Whelan's role as the kind of narrator for a lot of the episode, and there's that twist halfway through that they, or you know, whenever, roughly halfway through that she telegraphs it as a twist before it even happens, where she's the undercover cop, basically, which also is very Reservoir Dogs. She sort of says there's a twist, it's a good one, and I was like, that's not a bad twist. But then, you know, later on in the episode when when Patterson Joseph unexpectedly cuts her throat, knowing that she's the plant, you know, and they have that cool moment where she dies, obviously, and then Patterson Joseph turns to the camera and says, like, you know, I think he says, "You're with me now," right?
Yeah.
Like in a very dark, foreboding way. You're not really. I mean, like that was the thing, because I thought that was really cool, and then the episode isn't really. It doesn't really do anything with the fact that there's. I don't think he even narrates after that. It's like, what in what sense are we now with him? You know, I was like that was a bit of potential where I was kind of like, what did they didn't really do anything with that, you know?
I know what you mean. It didn't really. They didn't really follow through on it. In terms of saying, it is a very cool moment. Him saying, "You're with me now." That's great, because she's been the narrator up to that point. She's been the only person who's talking to camera. I don't think Arlo. Yeah. Is Arlo not? No, Arlo's not directly addressing us, is he? So that is a very smart moment, and it adds to the effect of killing her, basically, of that being the twist, which I don't want to get into this game of like, oh, I saw it coming, but you know, you kind of you know these guys well enough now that when they say the twist's coming, it's a good one, that's not a good enough twist, so you know that's not the twist. It's like, oh, she's an undercover, you know, she's an undercover police officer. So what? It's like that's not the stakes are nowhere near high enough to, you know, to what we've come to expect. I suppose
your narrator is not what she seems is quite a good twist, in the sense it's almost like Roger Ackroyd levels of you know, a good twist. But I suppose it was just it was a good, so his cutting of her throat and his introducing himself as the new narrator, that's a good and shocking moment in search of then something to do with it afterwards, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. And it comes quite late in the day as well, doesn't it? There's really only so much time you've got to develop that after that point.
Do you think this is the most outrageous Reece Shearsmith performance to date? It's one of them.
No, I think that's probably spaced, isn't it?
Oh yeah, maybe.
I think it's probably, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, well, as someone with an Italian surname, I was certainly watching this with great interest.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is large. It's all the performances are huge, and you know, tongues are firmly in cheeks, and you know, puns are flying around aplenty. So you know, we know there's no. You can become bulletproof almost, where you can. This is going to come. I'm going to bring this round to my favourite joke, I suspect. It becomes bulletproof in the sense that it's critic proof. You're doing stuff that you know is naff. You're doing, you know, bad puns, bad pantomime, you're doing a bit of bad slapstick stuff that not necessarily that it's naff, but it's considered outdated, that it's considered passé, which is where the I bet you're loving this on the Cooked and Bombed forum really lands. And I know on the podcast they talked about that for being like 1% of people. Well, I am that 1% of people who has not spent a lot of time on those forums, but certainly in my the peak of my Chris Morris adoration, that's kind of where I ended up. And like they say, that's a great joke, because you get to undercut the fact that those people probably would be tearing it to pieces.
I'm sure many of them were in real time.
And you can kind of bypass that by going, it's about intention. There we go. It's about intention, and it's about trust. It's about whether you trust the writers that they're doing this intentionally. Are they writing something that's naff? This is going to sound like a cheap shot, but when you look at something like Miranda or Mrs. Brown's Boys, you don't think these people know what they're doing is substandard and naff. You just kind of think that's what they've chosen to do. Whereas with that episode of Inside Number 9, you're like, we know that these writers are more sophisticated than these puns, so they're choosing to deploy them for effect.
Well, and to an extent, yeah, but I think also just Shearsmith, Pemberton, and the rest of the league have always loved that stuff as well. They have. I was enjoying the whole riff with do you know her? Yes, and she was a girl. And that ends with Trinidad and Tobago. Yes.
Yes.
that would fit right in at the King's Theatre in Edinburgh. The pantomimes I've been watching all my life. That's the formula of those kinds of riffs.
It's pure. Yeah, it's pure pantomime, and that's kind of the point. Is that's where pantomime comes from. We have pantomime because of Commedia dell'arte. That's the through line, and I guess it is quite clever to say, well, let's mash it in with Reservoir Dogs. Let's mash it in with a heist movie. I guess that is an interesting thing to do. You certainly couldn't do it for any longer than half an hour, though. Let's put it that way. It's they're in the perfect position, aren't they, where they can do this for half an hour. You certainly couldn't make a 90-minute Reservoir Dogs in Commedia dell'arte masks film.
I found that these episodes all went really fast for me, actually. Whatever, even on rewatch, or maybe even especially on rewatch, they absolutely fly by. Whatever the qualities I detect in them, and otherwise, they go really, really zippily. One of my highlights of Wuthering Heist was the actor they got to play. I think he's Mario in the thing. He's like the sort of like quite tall young henchman of the Doc, as played by Steve Pemberton, and he's just, I think he's I noted his name down. He's called Dino Kelly, but he's apparently quite an inexperienced, quite a young theatre actor basically, and I just thought he was hilarious. He's got that ridiculous voice and that kind of like not even quite Matt Berry, even a bit more ridiculous kind of intonation of things, and he was great. The bit when he picks Reece Shearsmith up and kisses him,
yeah, it's lovely. Is really really nice. Yeah, it's one of those things where we'll come back to this, where their casting is that's half of what they do. They don't just, it's not just about the writing. They cast it very very cleverly and very very smartly, which is obviously as much to do with the producers and the casting directors. But yeah, you get the right person for the role, and that role, you could argue, is quite two-dimensional. I mean, you could argue every role in that episode is incredibly two-dimensional, but he certainly is very two-dimensional. So you get the person who looks right and has the right kind of demeanor about him, and maybe you don't necessarily want anyone who's much more nuanced or sophisticated in that part. That all of those parts are I was about to say quite archetypal. They are archetypal. They are recreating very old traditional archetypes that come from Italian theatre.
I think we'll take a 5-minute break in a second, and then we'll come back to talk about episodes 2 and 3. But just before we move on, John, I just wanted to give you the chance, because we're already talking about where episodes can have precedence and stuff in Inside Number 9. One of your favourites that nearly made your favourite list, wasn't it, was Zanzibar. which was also a series opener, interestingly.
Yeah.
How do you feel this? Is this a worthy successor to Zanzibar? Would you say in doing a different thing?
That's interesting, actually. I was trying to work out. I was looking back at the first 3 episodes of previous series to see if there was a thematic link in terms of whimsical shock somewhere in between, and it doesn't really. They don't really work like that. But yeah, I think you're right. Actually, Zanzibar and Wuthering Heist are quite close together in that they're very obsessed with kind of theatre and drama, and they're slightly knowing, and they're quite clever, let's say. They're quite bold things to do, but you could argue that they're quite pretentious things to do as well. But yet they constantly reference them. So I think that's a good parallel to draw, I think, between Zanzibar. I mean, personally, I'd say Zanzibar's probably more successful, if only because it's got Rory Kinnear in it, and that will make it anything 40 or 50% more successful. Although weirdly, Zanzibar's got the daughter from Upstart Crow in it as one of the leads. So maybe there's some kind of through line there that they're working through the Upstart Crow cast.
Yeah,
but they can only put them in vaguely period pieces.
Well, maybe so. I mean, also, Gemma Whelan was in Game of Thrones, and I think we'll talk a bit more about Game of Thrones, at least tangentially, when we talk about episode 2.
You see, there's the problem. I've got no Game of Thrones knowledge, so there are these people who are phenomenally famous, whose names I just haven't got. Like Kit Harington. Someone's like, oh my god, I saw Kit Harington the other day. I'm like, I have literally no idea who that is.
Yeah.
And I'm aware that they're very big and very successful and very popular, but it just depends if you've seen it or not.
You hold on to that, John. I wasted the 2010s being into Game of Thrones. And on that bombshell, we'll go for a brief break. See you in a sec.
And finally, the man you've all been waiting for. This is his first Star Trek convention in quite a long time. I know he's thrilled to be here. Captain James Tiberius Kirkensall. Now, Bill's here to field a few questions, so just fire away.
Mrs. Edna.
All right, the first question.
Okay. When you were gonna beam down the planet, okay, for the last time in episode 25, I was wondering, like, what was going on with the crew in that particular
episode 25?
Yeah.
You got to give me a plot, see, because it's 20 years and it's a long time.
Oh,
plot.
Episode 25. That's where you and the crew of the Enterprise got attacked by these spores and started acting real weird, like hippies and stuff.
Right, I remember. Okay. What's your question?
Well, I wonder if you could settle a bet for me and my friends,
Sure.
okay? Like when you left your quarters for the last time and you opened up your safe, what was the combination?
I don't know. I mean, it's been a long time. I don't know that.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody? Oh, all right. Go ahead. Go ahead. You in the funny shirt.
Okay. Another bet.
Uh-huh.
Okay. On your horse farm, all right? How many saddle-bred horses do you have?
34.
Wait. Is that including the colt that was born earlier this week?
That mare had a foal?
Tuesday.
Well, I guess it's 35 then.
All right.
You know, before I answer any more questions, there's something I wanted to say. Having received all your letters over the years, and I've spoken to many of you, and some of you have traveled, hundreds of miles to be here, I'd just like to say, get a life, will you, people? I mean, for crying out loud, it's just a TV show. I mean, look at you. Look at the way you're dressed. You've turned an enjoyable little job that I did as a lark for a few years into a colossal waste of time. I mean, how old are you people? What have you done with yourselves? You must be almost 30. Have you ever kissed a girl? I didn't think so. There's a whole world out there. When I was your age, I didn't watch television. I lived. So move out of your parents' basements and get your own apartments and grow the hell up. I mean, it's just a TV show, damn it. It's just a TV show.
Are you saying then that we should pay more attention to the movies?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. Hey, you guys are the lamest bunch. I mean, I've never seen. I can't believe these people. I mean, I really can't understand what's going on here.
Welcome back. And me and John are just going to get straight into talking about episode 2 of Series 6, which is Simon Says. Yeah, what did you make of this one coming off Wuthering Heist?
It's this is the one where I was watching it slightly later than you, and also slightly later than another one of my friends who was messaging me about it, and I had to say, no, I'm not watching it right now. Don't say anything. And then about 45 minutes later, I just sent him the word "fuck" in capital letters.
Was your TV not working? No?
Yeah, exactly. It was just one of those ones that genuinely came up with some surprises. I think some shocks is probably a better way of putting it. It was genuinely, it went somewhere I certainly didn't expect it to go, in a way and a style that I didn't expect it to deploy. So, I mean, I guess it started off as a bit obvious and a bit tame. It's we've already slightly touched on this, the whole kind of ethos of fandom. That's obviously something they're well versed in. But it obviously it had an element of darkness to it right from the start. But I mean, you could argue that it's the twistiest of all the twisties. So in the episode before in Wuthering Heist, she winks at us and says, "Wait for the twist, it's a good one." Whereas I feel like in this one they were like, we're just gonna sucker punch you with like 5 twists. And we're not going to announce it, and that will complete it. That will leave you punch drunk.
I'm really glad you enjoyed this one, and it had an impact, at least in the moment, on you, because I didn't. Spoilers, I didn't care so much for this one, but I think the reasons why maybe you liked it more. I'm not saying, I know you're not saying it's like a stone cold classic or anything, but
no.
You liked it more, and I didn't. Might be illuminating. I think. Well, I mean, one thing I saw when Pemberton and Shearsmith were discussing it on their podcast, we'll get more on that in a minute. They were talking about Robert Altman's The Player as a reference point.
Interesting.
Yeah, where apparently I think I saw that once, maybe on Film 4 when I was a teenager. But is it one of the characters causes or semi-causes a murder or something, and is blackmailed for it? Is that an element of The Player?
Do you know what? It's been a really long time since I've seen it. I'm guessing that's the Tim Robbins character.
Yeah.
My abiding memory of The Player is the crane shot at the beginning. They spend the whole of the sequence of like the first 5-6 minutes talking about all the great opening crane shots, like Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, etc. And then they recreate it. So actually, I guess that's probably quite a good touchstone for those guys, in that it's having your cake and eating it. It's referring to lots of other things and recreating it at the same time, if that makes sense. It's doing a heist commedia dell'arte and turning to the camera and saying, we're doing a heist commedia dell'arte, how clever are we?
This is probably the first one they've done where they could actually, if they'd wanted to, and if he'd been available, they could probably have had Mark Gatiss walk in playing himself, and it would have been a believable plot element,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as it was, they had Russell P. Mavis as the main character, I believe.
Yeah, there was a bit. But that's interesting. You should go there. For some reason, I was thinking of him as Moffat throughout, but it shows you how narrow our cultural perceptions are.
Interesting. But then, like, he had a bit of of George R.R. Martin about him as well, didn't he? When they talked about the show itself, it had more of that kind of medieval fantasy feel to it than modern fantasy.
And Benioff and Wise are the pair of showrunners who actually did the show of Game of Thrones. But I agree, you've got the George R.R. Martin thing wrapped up in there. I mean, it's funny. I have been kind of, because I've been looking forward to getting this all out with you, John. But I've been kind of avoiding reviews and stuff. But I thought it was interesting that Pemberton and Shearsmith at least didn't talk about Misery, because that seemed to me to be the obvious comparison point with this, right down to the I'm your biggest fan thing, and an unwilling author being forced to revisit a prior commercial hit. I mean, that's just what Misery is. That's what.
Yeah, it is. That's funny, because I'm not that familiar with Misery. I haven't seen that in years and years and years. But yeah, I guess you're right. But I guess there's more a sense with this of not, you're going to rewrite this character, you're going to bring this character back to life. It's like, I'm going to rewrite this with you. Like there's agency there. Simon is very much a part of the process in a way that Kathy Bates isn't going to do any of the writing. She's just gonna, spoilers everyone, she's just gonna, hobble him.
Yeah. If only she discovered fan fiction, she would have led a much more fulfilling life.
If only.
Yeah.
Or would she? But yeah, there's more agency there, I think, with this character. But again, it gets to have. I mean, it gets to have all those debates about who owns a show, and him being the mouthpiece of saying that it was my vision, I created it, and then you've got nothing to do with it. You're just the fans, and now you're claiming ownership, which is I think is a really interesting debate to have, actually, when you're talking about fantasy and science fiction and things that people tend to be very, very passionate about in terms of pop culture, usually television, sometimes film as well.
Well, fan entitlement, gets bandied about a lot these days, especially in terms of like sort of toxic online fandoms and stuff. But I think I sent WhatsApped you a clip of the William Shatner Saturday Night Live thing where, he said, was it like early 80s, that sort of TJ Hooker period for him? He was just, parodying William Shatner at fan conventions where he's just like, the thing is, just get a life, for crying out loud, it's just a TV show, so that kind of awareness of that at least goes back at least as far as that. Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting. Aside from it being a very young Dana Carvey in playing one of the fan roles. Yeah, did he believe that though? I mean, he can't have. Like, it's a good joke. It's a good joke. It's a good sketch to do. But surely he knows that these people are his livelihood. I mean, they must know that. They must go to these. To the conventions and know that these are the people who basically pay their bills.
Well, that's an idea that's brought up in this episode, though, isn't it? That,
it's about the merchandising and the DVDs and all of those things. It's where the true power lies. I guess it's a really interesting conversation about where does the power lie in that dynamic. Is it with the creator, or is it with the people who, for want of a better word, consume? And say, therefore, we have ownership over this.
Well, there's an exchange to that effect, isn't there, where Pemberton's character says something like, do you think my success is owed to you? And I can't remember if it's Shearsmith or the other fan character, but they basically just say, yeah, in part, yeah.
He does. He says in part, yeah, we buy the merchandise, we buy the DVDs, we pay 60 quid to get a signature from so and so, and that's absolutely true. I don't know, it's really hard to know, isn't it, because unless you've walked in those shoes. I mean, I guess it would be a far more interesting conversation to actually have with Stephen Moffat and Russell T Davies and etc. in terms of whether they see an element of truth in that, whether that is where they would, in their private moments, where they would land in terms of, this is my creation and I'm glad it brings people joy, but that doesn't mean that it's theirs. I still have control and power over it. It's again, I think maybe this is one of the reasons I like it. It brings up some really interesting debates in terms of authorship and ownership, and the creation of art, and what happens when you create a work of art and you put it out there and you ask people to tell you what they thought of it and to respond to it, because that's the argument, isn't it? You create a work of art, and once you've let it go, it's no longer yours. And I think that was a very strong element in this episode of someone who felt that they wanted to keep really strong control over it, and everyone else be damned that it was theirs, and they were going to follow their vision all the way through. But the argument comes back, well, it's not yours anymore. You've put it out into the world and you've let it go, and we have as much right to say this was not good or this was good as you do to create it and proclaim it as a work of genius.
Well, the idea of fans or the creators or anyone in between being the best critics of a show or not, right? Because we actually covered the Game of Thrones finale in a prior episode of this podcast. Me and Rich had a chat about it, and I think we were relatively on the same page in the sense that there was an awful lot of hubbub over the Game of Thrones finale, and a lot of like Shearsmith and Pemberton are aware of this. Apparently, they're aware of the petitions that existed to remake the entire last multi-million-dollar series of Game of Thrones, to their whims and stuff, which is obviously ridiculous and obviously brings up the kind of misery entitled fan kind of stuff. But I think me and Rich just said, I guess we're being entitled fans here in our own opinions, but like we were saying, like, I think those people, the people who got most overwrought about the Game of Thrones finale, just hadn't really been paying attention to it for a while. Like, because they didn't, the things that went wrong, arguably, about the Game of Thrones finale are things that were manifest in the series for many, many seasons and were always going to be a problem when it came to wrapping it up, and I don't mean to play that smug superior card, but like, it's kind of like, I guess in my view of the series, I saw that kind of thing coming, so for me it wasn't a disappointment, which, well, obviously if it is, I understand if series and fan properties end or develop in ways that fans consider disappointing, it can be, if you're over invested in them, it can be quite crushing.
Well, I think this brings up a very interesting point, which is how long anything should last. I mean, namely
The Simpsons.
Okay, yeah, possibly, but isn't that because it's other? Is because it's outside of any internal logic, any kind of its own narrative reality. The Simpsons can go and do whatever they want endlessly over and over again, because there's like, the world is vast that they're in, and it's fantastical, and they can get away with anything. But once you've created your own internal logic of a universe, of a world, like let's season 7 of Buffy, it's it's all right.
Season 6 onwards of Frasier.
I mean that's a pretty bold leap from Buffy to Frasier, but I mean there's an argument to be said, that you should stop at 4 or 5 of anything, and which brings us on to we're now into season 6 of Inside Number 9, and will it fall foul of that rule? Will that rule still be true, that actually maybe after so long with something, with one idea, with one conceit, with one world, or one musical style, one musical genre, if you want to put it in musical band terms, maybe there's a point at which you should just stop and say, we'll either try something new and reinvent it, or we won't do it anymore, because after a certain point it's the law of diminishing returns. And I don't think that's necessarily about where a writer takes something in season 6 and 7. I think partly that's the fault of the way American television works, specifically US television works, where if the pilot flies, then that's it. There's 7 series, and you're all contractually obliged to do it. That's the difficulty, and it's obviously gonna hit road bumps and run out of steam, because life's gonna get in the way, and you're gonna lose actors, you're gonna gain actors, etc.
In terms of those kind of repeated patterns and sort of preoccupations that we've touched on already, I mean, I want to give my mate Dan a shout out this, because he texted me this and it hadn't occurred to me. Going back to series 1 of Inside Number 9, you've got that episode Tom and Jerry, which wasn't one we focused on, but it's the one where the Reese Shearsmith's teacher, like, troubled teacher character gets visited by a homeless guy, and they develop this closer and closer relationship. I see my mate Dan pointed out that this is a bit like an echo of that, where someone who's kind of powerless and relatively unprivileged is kind of, through various means is brought inside the house and is and then gains power, and the tables turn in various ways. And I think that is interesting. Is it? So when you apply that to the power of fan and TV creator, the homeless and the homeowner, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an element of I did like it, but there was an element of credulity being slightly stretched. And for me, where that falls down is in the latter half, where it just isn't believable. There are two things that aren't believable for me. And one is that it very quickly goes from he's going to give me a part in the show to he's going to allow me to audition for the show, which seems like a really weird concession of the power. If he really wields that power, then he's not going to say, well, you let me audition for it. Ultimately, you still, you have the decision. And then the idea of just doing all of that as the audition, just like pretending to seduce and blackmail a man, but actually it's all an audition. It just slightly stretched credulity, and that's the problem, and that's why it didn't quite have the same impact as Tom and Jerry, perhaps.
I thought I had a bunch of sequences that might have been dream sequences and weren't meant to be. That was one of them. I think one of the things that didn't work for me so much about it was I'm normally a big fan of drama, especially short drama that hits the ground running, because obviously it has to. This was a bit too much for me in that respect. That you come in, and before you've even got to know Pemberton's character, he thinks he's attacked this guy and fled the scene, and Shearsmith's character enters very quickly, and it's a bit too in media res for me. And I'm normally quite a big fan of things like that, where you'd normally, even in a short drama like this, you'd normally have like a few minutes to get to know Pemberton's character and see that he's this terrible guy with these, with this grumpy persona, and there just wasn't quite enough. I would never normally say this, there wasn't quite enough setup. It was too. I was already trying to catch up by the time it had started, and it was kind of I think that's mostly a virtue. And I think this was just over the edge for me. It was just the wrong side of that.
Okay, I mean the setup didn't bother me particularly. The setup, I was fine with it. It's throws someone into an incredibly intense situation that we either have seen or haven't seen. I didn't have a problem with the setup. I see what you mean, though, in terms of it's very much, it's like cutting out the first act, isn't it? It's like they've written 3 acts and they've just jettisoned the first act entirely, and then we're straight into acts 2 and 3.
There's too much plot to get through, I think, which is most number 9s juggle that really well, I think.
Yeah, I think in terms of how it was structured, in terms of how the time was parceled out. So I actually did. I did. This is the nerdiness. I did go back and time the suffocation scene. I was fascinated.
Welcome back to the really fucking weird EscapeGoat podcast.
Yeah, I was fascinated by, because that's a really bold thing to do, is to hold a scene that is quite upsetting and quite disturbing, and how long will you hold it for? We didn't need that shot to be that long, and maybe it's because I've been watching quite a bit of Hitchcock recently as well. So, for example, Rope specifically, I watched quite recently, and he does something very, very similar in Rope, where not just because of the not entirely true that he's trying to do it all in one take, but also he holds the camera in one position on one thing for a very, very long time to hold your attention until it's really uncomfortable. And the fact they played with the discomfort of that scene in the first place, but then they held it, and it wasn't quite a minute. I timed it. It was under a minute. It was about 51 seconds. So not far off. And when you think about it, if your average TV show is what, like, you're writing a 28-minute script, right, with buffer on either side, to use an entire minute of it just to have a kind of wordless shot of one man holding a pillow over another man's face. It's, I mean, that for me, that's do what you like, lads. That's well done. Excellent.
I think I'd never normally well, I think only on very few occasions have I criticised them on this level, but I think this was actually an episode where I think I would have preferred the obsessive fan part if it hadn't been played by Reece Shearsmith, because I quite liked seeing Pemberton in that mode. That I felt like I hadn't seen him in that, playing that exact character before. But I think I mentioned this in our previous podcast, where I think I've now seen Shearsmith play a few too many creepy, borderline psychotic, stalkerish, psycho characters, to simplify things a little bit, that it's just kind of a bit played out. And I think scenes like the scene on the bed at the end, which should have been genuinely chilling and sort of sexually troubling and all kinds of things, was kind of just a bit more of Shearsmith and Pemberton mucking about now at the stage in their careers where I've seen them do a bunch of that sort of stuff. I think it really would have benefited from like casting a younger actor in that role and having Shearsmith be like the agent or something.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, there's many ways of mixing that up, and it's an interesting experiment in terms of if you had got people who had never seen episodes of Inside Number 9 and what order you showed them into them in. That's the only way you could really get rid of that idea of, well, I've seen that type of character being played by Reece Shearsmith one too many times.
It conjured up also. I mean, in terms of
I know what you mean. He also looked incredibly similar to the guy in 12 Days of Christine, I think.
Yes, no, he did actually. Yeah.
All but the hood, and when you get to the point where like you look like how you look in another episode.
I thought one thing it brought to mind a little bit was, obviously we commented briefly on kind of like their past in the league and their past in Psychoville and things like elements of their comedy that may not have aged as well as others, going back 25 years, sort of stuff, all, which is all understandable, obviously. But I was thinking the idea that has been in their comedy going back to the league of like predatory homosexuals. I'm thinking, easy examples like, hair lip, for example, which is obviously crazily cartoonish. This was not that, but I was, the scene where they're on the bed, I was a little bit uncomfortably brought to mind of some of those more dated elements of the league, where I was kind of like, this is, and I know it went in a different direction after that, but it was kind of like the idea that this guy wants to be inappropriately close to Pemberton. Obviously, I'm not saying gay people can't be inappropriately obsessive and threatening. Obviously, of course they can, they're humans, but like it was a little, it was treading up to the edge of being a little bit uncomfortably reminiscent of some of the more dated elements in their comedy, I thought. That was certainly something that took me out of the moment a little bit.
I agree, actually. When it got to that point where he was leading him into the bedroom, I thought, oh no, this is the ending? Oh, that's disappointing that's where we've gone with this darkness. Which again, I wonder if this is all part of their game, because when he shoved a pillow over his face, I was actually glad. I was relieved. I was like, oh well, that wasn't the twist. That wasn't the denouement. Was that it was a horribly awkward, sexually blackmailing situation. Actually, it's just simple murder. Which, well, that makes, phew, goodness. That's well, I can put the kettle on now. So in a way, again, it's, you can tie yourself in knots asking yourself how many games they're playing and how aware they are of what the reactions are going to be and how they're playing against those. So yeah, I had the same thing. So, towards the last 5 minutes, I'm like, oh no, I'm not sure about this. I don't think I'm going to like this ending. Oh no, that's fine. They've redeemed it. But then they had to explain, all the back narrative of, actually he was doing an audition piece, and as I say, that stretched my credulity ever so slightly, that I couldn't quite buy into that. But nonetheless, the last 3 minutes kind of pulls it back anyway, redeems it.
I thought they might have been, in terms of me wanting to see stuff on Inside Number 9 that I haven't seen before. I thought the fairly extended scene where they were doing the podcast together. This is so meta now, as we're doing an Inside Number 9 podcast talking about this. His podcast and the show is called something like Number 9 as well, isn't it? Like I can't remember what the name is, but
it's the Ninth Circle.
That's it. Yeah.
So the show's called the Ninth Circle, and it's circumventing
or circumnavigating or something.
Circumnavigating, something like that.
But
I meant to look up before we did this actually what the Ninth Circle of what is the Ninth Circle of Hell?
I think it's the one where Satan lives. I think it's the lowest one. It's where he bides.
Satan's gaff.
Yeah, Satan's gaff. Yeah, as it's known. No, but I really like that scene, and I thought that they might, because as I say, there might have been a bit too much plot to cover in this, enough for a feature film. Genuinely like The Player or something. I thought they might have been better focusing on that podcast recording scene, where I really love the idea of like a podcast recording where you the audience slowly realize that one of the hosts has something over the other one. The power dynamic in the show is not quite what you thought it was once, and if I'd thought this out more carefully, I would have started blackmailing you live on air right now, John. But I won't now. I'll just hold that.
He says that. Listeners, you can't see what he's holding up to the camera, and frankly, I don't know what to say to that, David.
Something we'll move on to episode 3 in a sec. One odd thing I noticed, and I haven't read the reviews, I don't know if anyone else did, is the score at the start of the episode, but also afterwards, it has this kind of little, I guess, like slightly Byzantine kind of little musical riff that I guess is meant to sound a little bit COD Medieval, to sort of mirror the show that they're engaged in. But it sounds very, very like The Model by Kraftwerk. It's like do 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 do, and it kind of recurs a few times throughout the episode. And I wore my brain out trying to think of parallels to draw. Like if the what you call it, the soundtrack guy was the composer was trying to draw that parallel or not, and if so, what would that mean? And I couldn't get anywhere with it. It might just be a coincidence.
Trying to draw a parallel with Kraftwerk's The Model.
I mean, there's me come up with anything really.
There's no coincidences, says Freud, except a theme tune that sounds vaguely like Kraftwerk's The Model.
It was just pronounced. It was pronounced enough that I didn't think it was a coincidence, but I couldn't, apart from just the vague thing of being, someone who uses models as sort of empty vessels for creativity. I couldn't really make it stick any more than that. So I just.
It could be there. I mean, you'd probably get through a PhD Viva with it, but.
Yeah. Well, that's my one ambition. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll move on to episode 3, and I said this off air to John, but at the end of this discussion, and as I say, we only watched episode 3 yesterday, so there's actually probably time in our next episode, our conclusion, to come back to that one and see how it sits a bit more. But after that, I am going to ask John to rank the, ridiculous really, but to rank these 3, even just given what we've seen, and see what his favorite is. And we'll come back and do the whole 6 at the end, obviously. But yeah, so moving on to the third one, Lip Service. I mean, what did you think? Did you like it?
I did. Again, it's really hard, isn't it? It's impossible to just enjoy them now, isn't it? Particularly when you're gonna talk about them. I did enjoy it, but again, I found myself second guessing a lot, and I think now with Series 6, I think maybe the danger of episodes of Inside Number 9 are the ones that you're second guessing, which is why Wuthering Heist actually is a really neat idea and a really smart one to open the series with, because there's no room for guessing, because they've told you everything. They've gone, here are the subplots, here are the puns, here are the gags, here's what we're doing. There's nothing. We've winked at you, we've told you what the twist is, we've told you there's a twist coming, but actually it's not going to be that. Whereas this one, I did feel like I was constantly trying to get a handle on what was really going on. And I wonder if it's partly because of the casting. Now I'm gonna have to look her name up, because I admit I can't remember it off the top.
I think I can help. Sian Clifford.
Sean Clifford. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sean Clifford, who again, really, I don't really know much more than her as the sister in Fleabag. But
she was actually on the drama. Do you remember it made a bit of a splash last year? That was called Quiz. That was about the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire coughing scandal.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the James Graham play.
Yeah.
It's interesting because casting directors are notoriously not very imaginative. So the thing is, when you get someone who is playing a part that is very much against their type, and her type is that she's very smart, she's very articulate, she's very intelligent, she's very sophisticated,
tightly wound, neurotic.
Tightly wound, yeah. This is not just her Fleabag character, but that's kind of her casting bracket. So essentially, they were getting her to play the slightly, for want of a better word, frumpy, lonely,
Yeah.
little bit odd.
She's even kind of doing a slightly silly voice, isn't she? Low key, but
little bit loneliness. So again, I couldn't quite buy into it. So I kind of thought they're too good at this. You don't get the casting wrong like this. And I was spending a lot of time in the first 15 minutes thinking, who else could have done this? Who else would have sold this part better? And then by the end, I was just going, well, it's because that's not really what it is. It's because that's not really who she is. And then you get that final shot of her, stood behind the Prime Minister, and you're like, yeah, because that's who she is. She was playing a role all the time. That's who the real character and the real person is.
I suppose that brings up the question of like these things that take you out of the moment when you're watching something for the first time. Like, can they ever be considered truly successful, right? Because like you only get that one first time to watch it. And if you're distracted by whatever it is they're doing with that performance or that trope or whatever, then however much it makes sense at the end and you go, you did have that first time where you were taken out of it a bit,
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that brings up all sorts of arguments about who are you writing it for then? Who are you making it for? Are you making it for, nerds like us who are going to sit and analyze it and try and predict it and are very well versed in kind of their history and their obsessions, or are you just going to make it for someone who just happens to be tuning in at 9:30 on BBC Two on a Tuesday? Tuesday on a Monday? What day is it? So I don't know. I liked it. I liked the dynamic between the two of them. Again, I felt like Pemberton's character was a little bit. I guess what you were saying about Reece Shearsmith and the kind of slightly creepy character, I feel like I've seen Steve Pemberton play that slightly sad sack, down on his luck character.
Yeah, well, especially as you realize he's even more down on his luck as you get further into the episode. He's even more pathetic than he at first appears, and that's already pretty pathetic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What did you make of, like, because obviously there's 3 people in that episode. What did you make of the dynamics between those 3? What do you make of the kind of structure of, because that the Reece Shearsmith character is arguably quite out of place.
Well, that's so interesting because on at least 2 levels. Because one is it slightly took me out of it because in a fun second guessing kind of way, because I was like, he's got to be involved with whatever's going on here somehow, and he appears not to be. When he comes in at the end there, he appears to be as surprised as we are that Pemberton is dead, and that this plot has gone down. The other thing was that when they were talking on the BBC Sounds thing about comic archetypes, about Commedia dell'arte, they brought up Basil Fawlty and Manuel. Yeah. So it was like fresh in my mind. I was like, it's literally the plot of a Fawlty Towers episode, isn't it? As he thinks the guy has a woman in his room, and he's trying to, Basil's trying to expose it. So I was just because that was so fresh in my mind. I was like, this is almost. I know he's not doing a Basil Fawlty, performance, but it's kind of it's so stock that I was like, there has to be something more here, and there wasn't. It appeared not to be. I don't know. I'm sure there are forum theories about how the hotel manager was in on it, and every action he took in it was setting up an aspect of the plot. Or,
well, he's not though, is he? Because you hear the voiceover at the end when he's being interviewed by the news, and that doesn't mean he's not in on it, I guess.
Yeah.
But he is saying, that he's surprised. He seems on a surface level not to be involved in it, and I see no reason to doubt that. Which again, you have to dissect, and it's very interesting to interrogate. Well, why do you write the character that way? In a sense, it's the B plot, isn't it? You've got your A plot, and it's the dynamic between those two people and what's eventually going to happen. But you need something else to fill that time, and actually, that's probably where the laughs come from, isn't it? It is an absurd situation. It is ridiculous. It is a bit of shtick, a bit of business where Steve Pemberton is having the kind of prudish finger pointed at him, and even though he's not doing anything untoward, he is kind of being caught out.
Yeah.
So it's in a way it's the light and shade. It's a way to get the balance. It's to bring the laughs that will make the other side of that slightly more shocking.
I like the title, Lip Service. That's quite clever.
Yes, that is.
There's only so far a clever title will take you, but I mean, like apart from the bits of business with Reece Shearsmith, like the one of the more striking scenes in it was, when Sean Clifford's still looking out the window, lip reading, and he's actually talking to his ex.
Oh, I thought that was wonderful. I thought that was really wonderful. I mean, and in a lot of ways, you can say, at what point do they start writing? Do they kind of go, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could have, someone on a phone and someone reporting what the other side of the conversation is without being the other side of the conversation? I thought that was brilliant.
It's an imaginative breakthrough, wasn't it?
Wonderful piece of writing. I thought that was really lovely, really,
and it's kind of
to watch.
It's only fun. I mean, it's actually very sad and troubling, isn't it? It's just the thing that's funny is just that it's happening at all. That it's happening in that way. That's the joke is that that's happening in that way. But it's
that it's happening in that way. But also, it's this lovely, very, very sweet, touching idea. In fact, of hearing it reported back. Even though it's not her saying it, it's not her we're hearing saying it, but we're hearing it in the same. We're hearing it at the same time that he's hearing it, which is a really interesting thing to do, I think.
Do you think? I was just thinking. We talk about the hotelier character. We already talked about Wuthering Heist and Simon Says, where at least in Wuthering Heist there's this quite surface level, quite apparent mashup, to the point where with minutes into it, Gemma Whelan goes, "Yeah, you get what we're doing here. It's this mashup of commedia dell'arte and for Heist." Do you think this is a subtler kind of what if you married something like Fawlty Towers with something like The Conversation or something like Day of the Jackal, or I wonder if I don't think they overtly said that on their podcast report, but that it's maybe there's a bit of that going on. Maybe it came from something like that, what sinister stuff could be going on in the rooms at Fawlty Towers, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting idea. That works as a conceit. Sure, why not?
Well, I mean, Fawlty Towers goes almost as dark, doesn't it? Do you remember the episode that's about disposing of a dead body?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Fawlty Towers has its own element of darkness, which again, this is the tradition they're playing with. It is, comedy plus tragedy is time, for example, and it's also about perspective. And we're the viewer. We get to choose that this is a funny situation. We know that it's a comedy rather than a drama or rather than a horror. So you can play it for laughs. But again, this goes back to the idea of them touching on commedia dell'arte and having done Shakespeare as well. And they're just very well versed. They're not doing any of this unknowingly. And again, I don't want to take easy shots at Miranda or Mrs. Brown Boys or anything.
You already have, so that's fine.
I have. They're just not to my taste. It's absolutely fine. But also, you don't trust that there's any sophistication there. You don't trust that there's any knowledge there. You don't trust that there's any sense of well, we know how this works. We know how this has worked historically. They're just, it's just pratfalls and men dressed as women and fart gags.
I was thinking an interesting thing about this one is Pemberton's character is revealed to be a stalker, a obsessive stalker. Not just, I mean, you could say he is anyway, even if his cover story about being a husband was true, he is stalking. He's engaged in that, and that's obviously, particularly in today's kind of, slightly more aware of toxicity climate. That's a bad thing to be. That's a socially dangerous and unsuitable and condemned thing to be. But the fact that their sympathy for this kind of pathetic character, which again stretches back to the League, characters like Jeff and stuff, these pathetic men stuck in kind of their own private traps. The fact that they can take that and then make him also a victim of a very different, grander plot, and like he's been maneuvered into this patsy role. But I think it's also safe to say this is probably one where, if you think about the real grand contours of the plot, I don't really know why a lot of this is necessary. There's a lot of it. I'll have to go through it again and watch it and see if everything Sean Clifford in the episode does is material to him being a convincingly set up for this role. But I don't know if it is really. I don't know what you couldn't accomplish. If she could walk in as room service for 2 minutes and do pretty much the same thing. But
yeah, maybe. But then it would be an 8-minute episode rather than a 28-minute episode. I also thought as well they didn't really make enough of the politician of the subject of the actual assassination. I felt like I may have missed that. I felt like they hadn't played that up enough, and also maybe that's to do with our political climate as well, where they were trying to set him up as a proper agitator, and that's what they called him in the radio reports at the end. They call him an agitator, I think, where actually, obviously, in my head, he's the leader of the opposition, and therefore without getting into that particular minefield, therefore he poses no great threat at all. So the idea that someone in that position would be assassinated in the first place, slightly stretched that believability for
I think
me.
I saw him sort of perhaps slightly more mundanely as kind of like a Litvinenko type, like a kind of human rights involved, maybe opponent of a foreign regime, that kind of. But they are deliberately vague about it, and I suppose if your interpretation of him being a more domestic British figure is almost pointing at this kind of dystopianism that we maybe are starting to slightly thoroughly ingest in terms of British political thought, where we're not that far away from all this happening if we're not already there.
Yeah, but also the fact that whatever we think of Pemberton and whether he's a creepy stalker or not, like, we are talking about his ex, we are talking about someone who has been in a relationship with him, who is now the PA to whoever this guy is, whatever kind of incredibly revolutionary figure this person is. And those two things didn't seem to tally. It's like, what kind of woman would Pemberton's partner be? I guess who do you picture as that person that would be in a relationship with this man, and to then be this kind of high flying PA to some kind of Che Guevara in a suit? I don't know. Again, that didn't quite join together. There was a very interesting bit though. I tell you, there was again, in terms of watching it and sort of trying to predict where it's going, there's a moment when she opens the window, and it's not that near the end. I guess there's a lot of stuff that happens, but at the point at which she walked over and opened the window, I instantly thought he's getting shot. And I thought it was going to be there. I didn't think they were going to move the camera. I thought it was going to be him in that chair. Bullets going to come through that window. He's getting shot. I didn't have any of the other detail about, the other politician being assassinated and him being the patsy. And I can't figure out what it is, but I feel like it's something to do with the way it's filmed and the pace with which it's filmed and the actual framing of having everything. It's slightly Chekhov's gun, isn't it? It's like, don't open a window unless a bullet's going to come.
Well, and your own awareness as a viewer that you're in what's probably the final 3 minutes of the episode now. So something big's probably about to happen.
I thought that was really curious because obviously they then took me away from it, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe they're not going to do that. And then he got shot through the window, and I went, okay, well, I was right. I was just too early.
Well, they kind of. They've had, because there are a couple of Inside Number 9 episodes, like, my favorite Empty Orchestra, that have kind of happy endings, although not everyone gets off lightly. You're kind of lulled into thinking this is kind of one of those for a bit, aren't you? Where they seem to have found this kind of unlikely affection for each other, even though, I mean, it's I said the stalkerish thing. She's revealed, well, the first reveal about her is that she's a stalker, right? Even though that, we do not know the profundity of the level to which she's actually been manipulating him. But that's the thing where, I guess like the sort of gender politics tables are equalized on a surface level.
Yeah. Do you know what? I've just realized with you saying that's why you write the hotelier character like you do, because he represents the threat. He represents the interruption to that happy ending, right? So at that point, you're just thinking, oh, knock at the door. Oh, God, it's going to be this guy. So you built him up into this kind of Jobsworth threat, and therefore you're distracted from the real threat. So that's why you write the Reece Shearsmith character like that, I guess.
That's a good point. Yeah. And I suppose that would be diluted somewhat by if you did make him part of it. It was, it's nice to have actual genuinely harmless people stumble into these situations. I mean, I think it speaks to a lot of the, weaving the sort of symbolism of the assassinated politician into it, and the sort of stalker dynamics and the drama / sitcom kind of setting of it, and all the conspiracy stuff, like the touch of the TV report at the end and stuff. I mean, to make a wider point about these first 3 episodes of this series, I mean, they're definitely not lacking ambitions, right? Any criticism I've had, like, this series is still alive and well, in terms of where it's going, it's trying to reach for things. And I think even the criticisms I've made are sometimes about it's sometimes a surfeit of ambition, or so, I suppose more technically, sometimes it's a surfeit of like plot elements and things like that. But there's a lot going on still.
I think the bottom line to that is that they're still enjoying it. Clearly, I think they're clearly still enjoying themselves. They have lots more genres and styles that they have yet to deploy, and I think they're keeping themselves entertained and interested and challenged. And I think as long as they keep doing that, then that will come across, that they will be, they won't have run out of steam yet.
Well, I mean, on that note, before we run out of steam, as I say, you'll be coming back in a few weeks to talk about the whole 6, and we could sort of, I'm sure some of these episodes we discussed will have changed and shifted slightly in our minds after those. But just in terms of how these 3 have landed and how you've considered them, if you had to, as I say, if you had to arbitrarily rank them, where would you put them? So this is just in terms of this series. It's not in terms of where they land in the whole pantheon of Inside Number 9. It's just.
I'm tempted to say 2, 3, 1. So I will. I'll say 2, 3, 1, and I'm not even going to explain it. That's my decision.
Can you at least tell me what order that is?
That's I would say Simon Says at the top.
Oh, okay.
I would say Lip Service second, and I would say Wuthering Heist third.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm going to go... I'm actually going to go Lip Service first, and then I'm going to go Wuthering Heist, and then I'm going to go Simon Says at the bottom.
Okay.
And I think that's partly... This makes me sound like a really trad fan. I think it's partly because I think there's tons of stuff going on with Wuthering Heist and Simon Says, not all of it working for me. And I think... lip service, although it's maybe a more traditional kind of, sounds a bit belittling, kind of paint by numbers Inside Number 9 episode in some ways, a more straightforward one in some ways. It just does it all really well. But as I say, this is ridiculous. This is an episode I saw yesterday. It struck me well,
this is barely 24 hours of cogitation.
First draft of history is written in crayon, John. No, I mean, it wasn't. I said what I was looking for from the series. I was looking for a stunning a stunning episode or a game changer, a sort of 12 Days of Christine moment or something like that. I've not had that yet, to be honest. I've not had that yet. But this was very efficient and quite shocking. So I kind of, for now, I'll take that basically.
That's your LinkedIn profile, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a young man anymore, but I used to say that. Yeah.
Efficient and shocking.
Yeah. Now it just says shocking. Shockingly inefficient. I've rejigged it. Well, thanks for joining me, John. And
so how many total points is that though? So if we give them 3 points for the top episode, 2 for the middle, 1 for the. So mine was.
Oh, you mean so what if you aggregate our two?
Aggregate it. What comes out on top?
Well, didn't we both have Wuthering Heist in the middle?
I had Wuthering Heist last, I believe.
Oh, you did, yeah. So
Heist, 1 point. You gave it 2.
Yeah, I think episode 3 would win out because I ranked it first and you ranked it second.
It's like a mayoral election.
We've introduced AV at the EscapeGoat podcast. We're going in the other direction that the Tories are going, as so often.
As always.
Yeah, that's
God.
That's our one rule. But yeah, thanks for joining me, John. It's been terrific and good to catch up with you. And I was really looking forward to, talking this out a bit and kind of, I'm really actually looking forward to the next few, just seeing where they go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. At the end of the day, it comes down to having some television you enjoy to look forward to for a few weeks, and some of it will be disappointing, some of it won't.
That's the dream.
Live up to your expectations. Some of it won't. I've become very.
Are you doing Baz Luhrmann's wear sunscreen there?
In the last year, yeah, I'm doing Baz Luhrmann's sunscreen. Wear sunscreen. Watch Inside Number 9. Take care of your knees. One day you'll miss them.
The knees are very important. Never a true word was spoken.
They are very important. No, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a 28-minute nonsense TV show that doesn't really matter that much, but it's good to have something to look forward to, isn't it?
Yeah.
And for me and you, it's Inside Number 9. It's not for my mum. My mum's, for my mum, it's called The Midwife, and that's fine too.
Yeah. Although, any Inside Number 9 fans listening, it is very important. Ignore John. It's very, very important, and it's our show now, as Ruth Shearsmith says himself.
Yeah, absolutely. For regular listeners, I'd just like to plug my Call the Midwife podcast.
Is that called Mid-Table?
Oh. Mid-Table with it's a combination of a Call the Midwife and a snooker podcast.
You did get Jenny Agutter on, which was a coup, to be fair.
Do you know what? She's really good at using a spider, Jenny Agutter. She's got this really lovely technique with the spider. It's quite spectacular. It's quite something.
It's all going in the show notes. Links below, as they say. Well, thanks, John. Say goodbye to the listeners.
Bye, listeners.
That sounds so resigned. And goodbye from me. See you next time.
Bye.
You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, hosted by David Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications, or get me personally on @deep_Fagiani. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert.